Hi, good afternoon everybody. Barry Clark from Indigo Consultancy here with bringing you another edition of the Hospitality Interviews. Now today I'm delighted to welcome and introduce to you Linda McFarlane from Indigo Black Consultancy. Linda, very good afternoon. Nice to see you today. Linda's going to be sharing her advice and hints and tips with the thorny area of HR and people matters, particularly as we're working through the lockdown situation and the COVID coronavirus that we're working through at the moment. Linda, take a second to introduce yourself to everyone who's watching today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Barry, first of all, for asking me to come along today. Yeah, I run Indigo Black, and we are an HR provider, so to speak. We help businesses who don't have their own HR departments to solve their HR challenges and develop their teams. So effectively, we become their HR partner when they don't have to employ someone permanently in their own firm.
Super, thanks very much. So, Linda, your core business is supporting a variety of different business types with HR support and outsourcing. Particularly now with the coronavirus and the COVID-19 lockdown that we're under, what particular challenges has that presented for you and your clients? I'm particularly thinking in terms of furloughing and the risks to long-term employment.
Yeah, sure. I guess to some extent it's about being able to keep up to speed with some of the change, the pace of the change, because that's been going at such a rate, particularly at the beginning. So that was rather difficult and challenging for both myself and other businesses to keep up with. But aside of that, you're right, there's all of the kind of furlough piece. So it's understanding, months ago, none of us really knew what furlough was. And I've heard various interpretations and pronunciations of it as well. But we didn't know what it was. So it's about keeping up with that and making sure that we are able to provide our clients with all of the necessary legislative change, all of the necessary letters and templates that they might need for those furlough letters and unfurlough letters, so that in future, if they are ever audited from a government perspective, they're able to present a clean slate and able to have everything on file that they absolutely need to have for part of that audit process. So it's really been about kind of addressing their questions, assuaging any concerns they have, and keeping them up to speed.
Right. A really interesting point you mentioned there about the exiting furlough process.
Yeah.
The way that, I suppose, with everything that's been going on through the whole coronavirus situation, I mean, an industry of any kind, we've never faced a situation like this before.
True.
So it wasn't as though there was a manual that we could go to that had...
Absolutely not, of course, yeah.
There's been a large element of pretty much making it up as it goes along, which I completely understand. You must have come across some interesting interpretations of what furlough means and what can be done and can't be done.
Absolutely, and a couple of weeks ago I had a real kind of challenge from one of our clients who had employees. They had key work that was signed off to be done, and challenges from employees who just didn't want to come back, who were given every reason under the sun for not wanting to be back in the workplace. But equally, I think that's important for clients to understand, because they have to think of all of the different ways in which they might need to make some changes. They might need to implement some social distancing measures they've never had to think about before. So, a lot of their time at the moment is being taken up with that, but each and every situation presents a different case, if you like, and you're right, some of them have been both challenging but also interesting, because I'm sure to some extent, I keep repeating this, but I'm sure to some extent this is the calm before the storm. I think a lot more of those challenges will come. And I'd say that's the place we're in at the moment with regard to furlough and also the unfurloughing piece. I mean, I think everyone knows the government have said they'll pay furlough till the end of October, but only in full till the end of July. And the reality is we're actually waiting on some of the detail coming about the period between July and October. But I've already heard different interpretations and different people's kind of stories around what that actually means. And I'd much prefer to wait for the fact, and then we'll deal with the fact and take it from there.
Very, very true. But I suppose it's not helped by the kind of, seems very much a tendency now that instead of the government just making an announcement, the pre-announcement gets drip fed, and then
you know what it's going to do.
And of course, both you and I, both of our businesses are based in Scotland.
Yes.
I dare say we'll be speaking to an audience here who will be in England, the rest of the UK, and
Of course,
possibly
yeah.
in the field. But for us in Scotland, there is that added complication that Westminster announces one thing, and then you get a little bit of lag, and then Holyrood will announce usually something pretty close, but there have been some
Slight
differences.
differences, yeah, some slight differences for sure, yeah.
Brilliant. We touched there for a second, Linda, and the majority of our audience who are watching this are probably going to be operating in the hospitality world. Now, one of the peculiarities, I guess, hospitality was one of the sectors that was first impacted.
Of course, yeah.
Probably going to be one of the ones that's slower to come out of lockdown as well. So it means, probably every business watching this right now will have furloughed staff. In some cases, maybe a small number. In some cases, it will be dozens and maybe into the hundreds who are furloughed. What would be your best practice? What's your best tips for a business owner, a leader who currently has a number of staff furloughed? And I'm thinking particularly in terms of that ongoing communication, because hoteliers are so used to being in the thick. They're in amongst their team within a property when it's operating. So this idea of having staff working remotely or furloughed,
yeah, for sure.
A lot of people saying to me, never encountered anything like this before. So what's your best advice for keeping people involved and keeping them engaged?
I think there are a number of ways depending on the business systems that you have at your disposal. Certainly, whatever system that might be, the staying in touch piece is absolutely imperative, because I have come across a number of individual employees over recent weeks for whom there's real anxiety because they're not being kept in touch with, they're not being communicated to. And it's that fine line between kind of, what does furlough mean and what can you do in furlough that, doesn't kind of breach the regulation, so to speak. But, by keeping in touch with your team, whether that's email, some kind of update, maybe setting up a portal. I know a client that's set up a specific portal for this time period. And they're just ensuring that they keep in touch with the guys that way. And, the updates are there should individuals feel they want to access that. I think it's also important, though, to remember that the definition of furlough and the terms that it implies do allow a possibility of training. So some businesses or hoteliers might want to take advantage or opportunity of that training, whether that's some kind of continuous professional development or even just refresher training for going back to the workplace. And then that is there as a possibility. And there are lots of online options for that, whether that be Business Gateway, colleges, universities, or individual kind of business consultants that are providing that. There are loads of opportunities out there for online types of courses or webinars.
Absolutely, it's a really, really good point you make there, Linda. There's really, I guess, online training, the kind of video e-learning, it's now really going to come into its own, because the face-to-face training that so many of us used to do, it's just not appropriate anymore.
Not at all, but also what I'm finding is there are so many complimentary or free versions there, so this needn't be an additional cost, but it does provide that balance for some employees who might be feeling kind of what we are now, week 8, week 9, they might be feeling slightly bored of the kind of furlough scenario and being at home, so actually just kind of refreshing and building up their engagement through some refresher training might be an idea.
Great stuff. Now, I'm very mindful as we've strayed onto the topic of training. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn. Am I right in saying that if a business has furloughed employees and they undertake training, which is allowed, am I right in saying that has to be reflected in the pay that's being passed on to employees? They need to be, so a business owner needs to ensure they're paying at least minimum wage as opposed to the furlough pay. Is that right?
That would be, they should be paying minimum wage, and certainly they should follow all of the guidance on gov.uk for the aspect of training and the kind of part that might play should they decide to do that. All of the advice is very straightforward and is easily seen on the government website. So that's definitely worth a look to make sure that you're following and complying with it for definite. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that, Linda. I know it's a query that one or two owners have raised with me recently. They'd heard that there has to be a change between the 80% on furlough and the minimum wage when staff are undertaking training. So thanks for clarifying that. Now, moving on slightly, where I think it's fair to say, you know, we can kind of see signs of the other side happening now, both the
yeah, little bit. Yeah.
Thankfully, you know, both the Westminster and the Holyrood government have laid out their plans for coming out of lockdown. And, you know, we now have although we don't know the precise dates, that's the key thing. We've got a good idea now of what kind of businesses will be allowed to open and the kind of timescales.
Yeah.
So, you know, broadly speaking, for hoteliers, for accommodation providers, it's looking to be phase 3 of the plan. So we're going to be at least probably 8 to 10 weeks away from hotels realistically being able to open. A bit earlier than that for restaurants and pubs. But that means that, you know, now owners and managers really need to start thinking about how they're going to phase that return to work and moving up to reopening. Now, one of the things I'm very conscious of is that, you know, whether it's a cafe you run, whether it's a pub, restaurant, or a hotel, reopening is not just a case of unlocking the door and opening. You know, you need to work up to that. And I think one of the implications that people need to be mindful of, and they've, you know, but a few owners asking me about this, what from an HR and a people perspective, that phased return is going to mean that you may have certain job roles returning to work before others.
Of course, yeah.
Might be maintenance or sales, may well be returning before housekeeping, cleaners, waiting staff and chefs and such. And they'll all need to return before the business actually reopens. And I know it's a concern with quite a few people that could potentially present a minefield. People complaining that why is Jimmy going back to work before Sue?
Yeah, absolutely, I understand.
That minefield from an HR perspective of fairness. What would be your advice in that respect?
I think first of all, I do appreciate the difficulty. You're right, it is a real challenge. I think it's about taking more of a kind of umbrella strategic approach, so to speak, and really exploring different rationales. So in that time period between now and the actual kind of go back date, I'd be looking at considering a number of options. And as you rightly suggest, I mean, the key expectation on any employer is that they have to be fair and reasonable in the way that they have considered all of this. So if someone were to appeal it, for example, then the employer would have to be able to clearly outline what their selection criteria was. So let's say the selection was about skills, or it was about experience, or it was about some job specific task. It might be about seniority, because actually in order for any business to operate, you have to have some kind of leadership or number of leadership roles, particularly with the numbers of some of the teams that we're talking to today. So it's about understanding what selection criteria you are applying as part of your strategy, as part of your plan, and then bouncing that off someone. So it's not about kind of sitting in a darkened room, sitting at home because you're working at home and not talking that through. It's actually about bouncing that off someone else to get a different perspective, to ask them to challenge your thinking. And then revisiting it, putting it to bed, and then revisit it again, thinking about that whole kind of, if I were challenged, put myself in the shoes of the challenger. If I were challenged, what is my response to that? And then that way you kind of slowly work through any potential issues that there might be in the plan that you're intending to apply. Brilliant,
great advice. So it sounds as though really there it's about thinking through every step and kind of keeping a log of your actions and your decisions.
Maybe asked to justify those one day. So you're right, it's about just keeping a note or a file note, some kind of log of that thinking, that decision-making process. Yeah, absolutely.
Great advice. Thanks, Linda. Inevitably, I think we need to face the fact that there already have been some business closures. There's discussion a lot in the media of how many businesses will actually be able to come out of furlough and reopen. Yes. And I mean, for both owners and for employees and businesses, that's going to cause quite a bit of underlying anxiety and concern. That's inevitable. And it's, you know, business levels just aren't going to return to where they were back in January, February when we restart. That's realistic.
Yeah, for sure.
I know there's this new phrase of the new normal.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Whatever that actually means. In terms of, I think I'm speaking out to the owners and the senior executives now, who are having to think about what the future is going to look like. They're having to face those quite difficult decisions of, can we bring all of our staff back? Do we need to reduce numbers? Is the business actually viable moving forward? For people in those senior positions who are having to make those considerations and those decisions, what would be your advice as to how to do that professionally?
So I think first of all, it harks back to some of my previous response about kind of plan and replan and consider contingencies and all of that. I think it also requires, because this is also unprecedented, it requires an element of open-mindedness that perhaps none of us have had to consider before. It's ultimately, it is about revisiting and remembering your goal, which is to retain and rebuild your business. So as long as that is held kind of front of mind, then it's just about considering all the legislative impacts. So from a team point of view, it's about making sure that if you are planning to restructure, then you do that in a fair and reasonable way again. If you're having to consider termination of employment, if you're having to consider consultation with all of your team and you've not done anything like that before and you have no experience, then it's about talking to someone who can advise and support you. And whether that's somebody like ourselves, whether that's a local business gateway, whether that's your Chamber of Commerce, there are again opportunities out there widely for kind of HR support services to just guide and to support you each step of the way. But it's just making sure that you are treating your team in a favourable way and in a respectful way, because ultimately one would hope that when the business does rebuild, you are able to regain the full team again, and that's ultimately the hope that all of us would have. But I do think there's an element of whatever approach you take. As I said already, it's almost the calm before the storm. Whatever approach you take, you're going to get some unpopular decisions being made. You're going to get some questions that will be challenging of you, and as a business owner, it's just about not being afraid of those unpopular decisions, but actually having, in this unprecedented time, to have to make those to retain your business ultimately.
I guess ultimately it's making no decision is probably the worst case scenario, really, isn't it?
For sure. It's about considering every avenue open to you, and again having that someone to bounce it off, whether that's even just a buddy, somebody that you can say, I need you in my corner to do a little bit of brainstorming here. Let's just work this through. What are the options and avenues open to me? And sometimes there are options and avenues you previously didn't even consider. So it's just about using that open-mindedness to reach a potential conclusion. But you're right, it's not necessarily going to be the end point of the February closure that will be the start point of the June or July reopening, and that's the difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You raised a really interesting point there, Linda, of seeking that help and that support. And as a former hotelier, I know from personal experience that's something that we're not always very good at doing. As an industry, we seem to be conditioned that there's an expectation the answer to everything, and that seeking help and advice is almost a sign of weakness. Of
course, I can understand that. Yeah,
it's and for some, in a leadership role in the industry, it can be really lonely at times. You mentioned there thinking outside the box in terms of looking for support and advice. Did you have any particular sources in mind there?
I think there are a variety out there. Your local business gateway and Chamber of Commerce are very helpful and certainly very open to providing business mentoring services at the minute, free of charge. So that's a useful route, just again to have that someone to bounce the ideas off. It might be somebody like a business consultant like yourself, depending on the scenario and again the topic, or like myself if it were specifically people related. You might even want to consider some kind of mentor or coach, somebody that's the kind of end of a phone, the online, just the conscience, almost like the the movie Pinocchio, where the Jiminy Cricket's the conscience on your shoulder. It's having that conscience, it's having that somebody to bounce it off. And I always use the Jiminy Cricket analogy because I think it's useful to just have somebody to kind of bounce some of these ideas off.
Absolutely, that's a great example. I really like that.
Yeah, so I think it's just it's not the, and I would strongly recommend, because I know what you're saying about the sign of weakness. But I think again I'd reiterate, this is so unprecedented. Nobody knows what's ahead. So let's all, I know there's a lot of kind of hashtag we're all in it together, but actually we are, as far as the not knowing what comes next. So in reality, let's use each other's experiences, and we can really learn from each other and tiptoe our way forward rather than taking leaps that we might come to regret.
Sure, no, really, really wise advice. Really wise advice. Linda, just as a final question, really just wanted to pose, what would be your 3 top tips for business owners, for business leaders that are watching the interview, as we're starting to head out of lockdown, back into a position of more businesses being able to reopen, and trying to bring some sense of normality back to the workplace.
Sure.
I'm thinking, for business owners and execs looking at their team of staff and looking to get back to where they were, that engagement, morale, what would be your best advice, your 3 top tips?
I actually would keep it really simple. I think be open-minded, because none of us knows what's ahead, and therefore if you're open-minded, you are able to build on whatever opportunity presents itself. Be as resilient as you can, because who knows if there's another phase coming, who knows, kind of what direction we might take. So your ability to bounce back will really count in the now and in the future. And last but not least, I'd say be kind to yourself, because we don't have all the answers on our own. None of us does. So I think the more that you can be kind to yourself and know that you're edging forward in the best possible way and in the best way you know how, then you're going to allow yourself not to be clouded by anxiety and stress that might otherwise present itself.
Really, really wise advice there, Linda. That's great. So I'm sure some of our viewers will be really interested in learning more about what you've been talking about today. Where can people get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
Okay, we have a website. It's www.indigoblack.co.uk. But better than that would be give me a call. My mobile is 07577 660 590.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Linda. I'd encourage all of our audience today, if you're looking for that bit of support, looking for a bit of advice, drop Linda a message. Better still, give you a call and have a wee chat. As I've got to know you over the last few years on the networking circuit, such a great, the thing I really admire, Linda, is you're a great source of knowledge, but also you have that really positive, practical approach as well to help.
Thank you.
So my sincere thanks for joining me today for the interview.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for asking.
Great.